Hari Om. Om Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurur Sakshat Param Brahma, Tasmai Sri Gurave Namah. Sadashiva Samarambham Shankaracharya Madhyamam Asmadacharya Paryantam Vande Guru Paramparam. Saraswati Namastubhyam Varade Jnanarupini Vidyarambham Karishyami Siddharbhavadu Me Sada Stapagaya Dharmasya Sarvadharmaswarupine Avadaravarishthaya Ramakrishnaya Te Namah. Om Sahana Vavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma Viddushavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. We all know that 21st of September is observed as the World or International Peace Day. And this is a commitment from the United Nations, UN, to maintain peace, to maintain or we can say to address the conflict resolution, and also encourages the individuals, encourages the communities, encourages the nations for what? To work towards peace. When we say peace, it is also implied that don't commit any sort of violence, right? But beyond that, the real motto of International Peace Day is also to build conduciveness or a conducive structure where all beings can, what is the right word? All beings can flourish. So above all the differences, above all dissimilarities, everyone coming together and commit to peace. So basically, this is a kind of a culture that is created towards bringing peace. So when we say peace, is it something like only on that day the peace should be maintained? When we say 21st of September, is it something like only on that day the peace should be maintained? That is not the aspect which is considered, right? But to have peace as a dominant factor and observe, right? So when we say observe, it doesn't mean that the attributes required for abiding in the peace will not just come on that particular day, because any attribute that we are trying to build towards peace, anything that we are building cannot sustain. So that is where we cannot observe peace only for one day. So it means that peace has to be there, and that peace has to be an inherent thing. That peace has to be an implied aspect in all of us, and that peace should also be known. When we say non-violence is one of the observations that we do on World Peace Day, it is not only just non-violence, it is also about respecting, it is also about understanding, it is also about knowing the commonalities, knowing the similarities, knowing the dissimilarities, and that peace has to be inherent in us. then only we can exhibit peace. So my question is it possible to bring the peace just for a day without knowing what peace is? See, we all are aiming for happiness, correct? We all are aiming for happiness and we are doing different things. So at the end of the day, what are we trying to do? We all want to be peaceful in life. We are trying to do different things to become happy, and ultimately what we are thinking is to become peaceful in life. Maybe peace, we can say it's a subtler aspect. Bhagavan in Gita says in the second chapter, 66th verse, Nasti buddhi ayuktasya nacha ayuktasya bhavana nacha abhavayadasyanti ashantasya kudasukham. So when the mind is not controlled, when the senses are not controlled, and when a person who is not having the understanding of the true self and not doing any contemplation, not doing any reflection about the true nature, without controlling the mind and senses, Bhagavan asks here, without that contemplation, how one can have peace? And without peace, how one can have happiness in life? Nasti buddhir ayuktasya naja ayuktasya bhavana naja abhavayadasyanti ashantasya kudasukham. So now, what is needed? Concentration of the mind, Atmanishta. Concentration of the mind to understand the truth within, the Satya Buddhi. So without the peace of mind, how one can experience the happiness? So when we say International Peace Day, the dominant thought one should have is basically all are equal. There is unity in diversity. There is a common thread. Maybe in a Vedantic term we can say Sarvam Brahmamaya. Correct. And this thought will not come just on a particular day or just like that. This has to be the substratum, this has to be the foundation of one's understanding. This has to be the understanding that one should have for being peaceful, to treat everyone as same, regardless of their race or their differences, or regardless of their capabilities, or be it wealth or knowledge or power. As per Kadopanishad, we are given with two options in life. The first option is the prayers, that is called as the way of power or the road of power. The second one is Shreyas, that's called as the path of peace. First is what? The power, and second one is peace. And if we are given with these two options or choices, the majority will go for the path of power, because the attraction will come from the prayers or the power, because the path of power is quite addictive. Path of power is quite addictive. As per the Kadhopanishad, the two options, Shreyas and Prayas. Shreyascha Prayascha Manushyameda Tau Samparithya Vivinakti Dhira. So the two options are given, the path of power and the path of peace. And majority, we can say 99% will go with the path of the power. So who will select the path of peace? The people who are wise, discriminative and intelligent. It is not something like when the two options are given, few will do or few will go with path A and a few will go with path B. It is not something like that. Because the power of or the path of power and the path of peace, proper definitions are given. It is not something like randomly people choose a path. The proper definitions of the both paths are given. The path of power and the path of peace. So in that situation, it is quite uncommon that a 50% chance is there for path A and path B, right? Or 50% in path A and 50 in path B, or any kind of a percentage. So that is where the path of power is clearly articulated. The path of power, a path of peace is also clearly described. So that is where the wise, discriminative and intelligent will understand the difference between the power and peace. And the wise will choose the path of peace, the path of Shreyas. And choosing the path of Shreyas is the beginning of the journey to perfection, beginning of the journey to fulfillment, beginning of the journey to wholesomeness. If you see in the Mahabharata, the story of Pandavas and Kauravas, Bhagavan offers the Sena. Also, Bhagavan offers himself to join any one of the party, any one of the group. Both are clearly defined, right? When one gets the Sena, the Narayani Sena, it is clear that the power of the military, the Sena, is defined. The Akshavani, correct? And Bhagavan, when says that I will join, not only joining, I will not fight, I will not do anything, I will not fight. So both are clearly defined. And the option that Duryodhana chooses versus Arjuna, this is also a kind of a scenario where the path of power and the path of peace. What Arjuna did, Arjuna aimed for the wholesomeness, or Arjuna aimed the journey towards the wholesomeness or the fulfillment or the perfection. That is where he has chosen Bhagavan as the charioteer, who is positioned in front of the Jiva. The Paramatma is positioned in front of the Jiva. And the weakness of Jiva will never come in front when the Ishwaran is positioned in the front. The path of peace. And Arjuna also know that by choosing the non-fighting, Krishna will only give absolute peace and fulfillment. That only will bring the end of suffering in life. Arjuna was very clear. And if we look at ourselves, by nature, ourself is the symbolism of peace. When we say the self, going back to the Chatusloki Bhagavatam, Bhagavan Sarva Bhudanam Adhiksho Avastido Guham. The Lord who is sitting inside us, the Master, the Chaitanyam which is there within all of us, the self. The nature of the self is peace. Adhiksho Avastido Guham. We call it Atman, Brahman, and Bhagavan, different names. Vadanti tat tattvavidaha yat tattvam jnanam advayam brahmedi paramatmedi Bhagavan idi shabdyade. And the intelligence which is within all of us doesn't rise from any external objects or cause. And our very nature itself is peace. And one has to establish the contact with that ultimate reality within. So what one has to do when Bhagavan says Ashantasya Kudasukham, for the one who is ayuktan, one who has not mastered the restless mind, one who has not grasped the essentials to know the truth within, will never find peace. For such a person, how happiness can be experienced? This is the question. And when I am at peace with myself, I see clearly what makes me happy. And when I am at peace with the world around me, the transactional world, I see clearly why I suffer. And the suffering is due to what? Suffering is due to the distractions. Suffering is due to the disturbances. Suffering is due to the various things such as competition, comparisons, distractions, disturbances. So when I am at peace with myself, I see clearly what makes me happy. And this peace is never absent. When we see the three avasthas that we undergo, Jagrat, Swapna, Sushupti, and in the Sushupti, without the disturbances, without the comparisons, without the transactional world, without the identities, we are at peace with ourselves. Peace is never absent. This peace is always there. This peace is always there in all the three avasthas. But it is covered. Bhagavan again in Jnana Sannyasa Yogam, in the fifth chapter, it's the Karma Sannyasa Yogam. Karma Sannyasa Yogam. The Jnanam is covered by the Ajnanam. Ajnanena avritam jnanam. Tena muhyandi jandava. So all living beings, all living entities are completely deluded, are completely confused. Because the inner knowledge is covered by the ignorance. Whenever we are drifting away from the core, whenever we are drifting away from the peace, that core is called as the Nijasthiti, or that core is called as the Sustiti. The core. What happens? It leads to stress, because we when we drift away from the core and when we are operating at the periphery, what happens is that will lead to stress, that will lead to anxiety, that will lead to comparisons, that will lead to competitions, that will lead to doubt, that will lead to fight. So that is where, when one drifts away from the core, from the nijasthiti, from the susthiti, what happens is basically aswasthata. Because we are operating not at the core. When we forget the core, when we forget the susthiti, when we operate at the transactional plane without knowing the true self, without knowing the true peace within us, that state leads to stress. And if you see, in India, I was reading an article a few days back, 35 to 40% of the people who are working are stressed. The mental health is deteriorating. They also say that the work-life imbalances and the consequence of the stress is affecting the productivity. Basically, everybody is trying to derive the source of energy from the outside world, from the transactions. This is a scenario when one drifts away from the peace, when one drifts away from the nijasthiti or susthiti. That is where the aswasthata, right? So aswasthata is all about, we getting into a state of stress, anxiety, doubt, competition, fight, etc. Let us take our example, the avasthatrayam, when we undergo the deep sleep. What are we experiencing in the deep sleep? For us to get into sleep, we need to preempt the thoughts, we need to get rid of all the things, right? Get rid of the thoughts. And what are we experiencing in the deep sleep? We are experiencing peace. We are experiencing the peace in the absence of everything, in the absence of everyone. There is nothing to be experienced there. There is no object to experience. What is happening in the deep sleep? In the deep sleep, there is only one being present. The objects are not at all active. Objects are plunged into the subject. There is only one being present in the deep sleep. The person who is experiencing the sleep, the person who is sleeping and experiencing the deep bliss, the deep peace. We are in the world of consciousness in the deep sleep. Only consciousness is prevailing. But by the moment or when we get up or wake up, we are getting into the world of matter. We are getting into the plane of matter. So what happens? The mind becomes active. Mind, body, intellect, senses, relationships, smriti, everything comes into picture, and then we are fully carried away into the plane of matter, into the transactional world. In the deep sleep, if you see, no identity of the body, mind, intellect, senses, even the three sharirams that we have, Sukshma, Sthula, Karana Shariram, nothing is there. Nothing is dominant in the deep sleep. We are in the world of consciousness. We are in the world of peace. And this peace can be attained or not. This peace cannot be attained, because this is our true nature. This is not something that we can attain by doing something. That's why I said, if we are trying to become peaceful on a particular day, what happens is basically this is a virtual creation. Whatever is attained will disappear, whatever attained will get shattered. So that is where we have to be with the inherent nature. That inherent nature itself is the peace. That inherent nature is the truth. That inherent nature is divine. That inherent nature is something which never undergoes. That is where Bhagavan gives this assurance in the second chapter. Nasado vidyade bhavo, na abhavo vidyade sada. Ubhayor abhidrishto anda. Tonayo tattvadarshi. So what is real will never undergo modification. The unreal has no being, and there is no non-being of the real. And the truth about the both, that is real as well as unreal, is known by the seers, known by the wise, known by the knowers of the truth. That is where I was saying in the beginning, Shreyas and Prayas, both options are given. One who has seen the essence will go towards the path of peace, the Shreyas. It doesn't mean that going into the Shreyas is a compromise. Nothing like that. Because this is also a great assurance. When you pick up the path of Shreyas, Prayas is implied there. Bhagavan gives this assurance. Prayas is a part of Shreyas. Whatever is needed towards a meaningful life, whatever attributes of power are needed will be offered. This is a great assurance. But one has to pick up the path of Shreyas, and prayers will automatically happen. So there has to be a balance. So that is where the path of Shreyas, how one can do practically, by doing karma as a karma yoga. See, the only issue with doing actions, doing activities in the beginning during our dhyanam, the great confusion of Brahma, how that got solved? By bringing the clarity that don't get attached to the manifestations that you create. Don't get attached to the srishti that you create. How it's possible? Without having the accumulations of raga, dvesha, kartrutva, bhoktrutva. So if we are not accumulating the stains, it is very easy, because the karma vasanas are not coming. And again, this is the state of samastiti as per the language of Bhagavad Gita. The even keel attitude, the equanimity, that brings down the disturbances. If you see Bhagavad Gita, first chapter, the Vishada Yoga, Arjuna Vishada Yoga. So the first attempt by Bhagavan is to make Arjuna realize the inherent peace, the inner peace, to realize the inherent contentment, bringing Arjuna understand about the real nature, the Surupa Sthiti or Surupa Sukham. So how one can realize the inherent nature that comes through bhakti, jnana, vairagya. So that is where Bhagavad Gita again stresses on the Shraddhavan labhade jnanam tatpara samyadendriha jnanam labdva param shantim achirenadi. So one who has got this knowledge about what? Knowledge about the Swarupam, knowledge about the true self, will attain the supreme peace. So what one has to do? The mind should cooperate. The mind should allow to get convinced. The mind should also undergo the pain of attaching to the objects and understand the problems in the material plane. And the mind should also get convinced that attaching to the outside objects will bring suffering. So the only way is train the mind to stay at the core, at the heart. As per Bhagavad Gita's language, the Brahmi Sthiti. So once you are in the Brahmi Sthiti, the mind, we can say the mind is totally out of the delusion. I hope it is clear. If we perceive anything different from our true self, it can always bring different perspectives or different appearances, just like a mirage that we can see in the desert. So we were going through the Slokas in the Atmabodha. So one has to understand the existence, consciousness, bliss, absolute behind the names and forms. The names and forms are not having any independent existence. Again, going back to Chaturshloki Bhagavatam, Anvaya Vidiregabhyam Yatsyat Sarvatra Sarvada. The consciousness principle is behind the Nama Rupam. Consciousness principle is the foundation for the matter principle to work. Whereas consciousness principle is an independent principle and it doesn't need the matter principle to exist. It is always existing. And it is also clear for us that nothing can be experienced in the form of a name and form without the Chaitanya. Jadam cannot exist without Chaitanya. Asat cannot exist without Satta. Sat is needed for Asat. When we say Asat, any names and forms to exist, there needs to be Chaitanyam called as the Sat. That gives life, that gives meaning. Sarvabhudanam adhyaksho avasthido guha. The Chaitanyam presides, Chaitanyam as the adhyakshan in all of us to do the activities such as seeing or hearing or smelling or eating or whatever is it. So the peace, what we are talking, our true self is the embodiment of the peace. Our true self is the embodiment of all alaukika gunam. Whatever is possible is there in us. Sarvagam, all 65th verse is saying that Sarvagam Sachidanand. Let's go through this verse, 65th verse of Atmabodha. Sarvagam Sachidanandam Jnana Chakshur Nirikshate Ajnana Chakshur Neksheda Bhaswantam Hanumandhavad Jnana Chakshu Sachidanandam Sarvagam Nirikshade Ajnana Chakshu Na Ikshade Bhaswantam Hanum Andha. So the Atman is the existence, consciousness, bliss principle and is ever present everywhere, and it can only be perceived with the help of Jnana Chakshus, with the help of or perceived by the eye of wisdom. And if we don't have the eye of wisdom, the nature of our Atman, the existence, consciousness, bliss, absolute, which is present everywhere, cannot be perceived. Just as the blind do not see the resplendent sun, so too one whose vision is obscured by ignorance, whose vision is covered with ajnanam, cannot see the radiant self or Atman. The one who is not having the clarity about the consciousness and the matter principle and the importance of the consciousness principle will never be able to see the radiant self, which is the existence, consciousness, bliss, absolute. And if one is not able to see that, it is due to the ignorance which is covered. The ajnanam in jiva is not allowing to understand the radiant self or the Atman, which is having the nature of existence, consciousness, bliss, absolute, which is present everywhere. And this can only be perceived when one has got the Jnana Chakshus, the eye of wisdom. So here, let us also understand that the individual reality, the so-called as the Jiva and the Jiva Atma and the universal truth, we call it as individual as Atman and the universal as the Brahman. Let's also be very clear here that there is no difference, there is no dichotomy. There is no dichotomy insinuated between their natures, between the nature of Atman and Brahman, because our Mahavakyams are declaring that there is no difference between the Atman and Brahman. There is no difference between Jiva Atma and the Paramatma. Because if you see the Mahavakyam, Prajnanam Brahma, this very awareness is Brahman. So called as the Lakshana Vakyam, the Tattvamasi, you are that ultimate reality, you are that ultimate Brahman, the Upadesha Vakyam. I am Atma Brahma, this very self is Brahman. This is the Anusandhanam. Aham Brahmasmi, I am the Brahman. This is basically the Anubhava Vakyam. So that way, one should not confuse between Atman and Brahman. Atman and Brahman are same and absolute non-dual consciousness. Through contemplative power, through the dhyana balam, one should realize the true potential, and that reality is not different from the universal reality. If you go back to Shvedashvara Upanishad, Rishi says, Te dhyana yoganugada avashin devatma shaktim sugunair nigodam. Mind initially was going in an extrovert fashion, or we can say the fascinations that are there around. What they did, they understood this quickly and they turned the mind inward. They equipped the mind to turn inward to realize the peace within, they realize the infinite source of happiness within, to realize the source of divine power within. Devatma Shaktim Sugunair Niguda. The divine nature, the divinity, which is the embodiment of peace, which is the embodiment of everything, is within. Originally, the mind was towards the extrovert fascination. They quickly understood that the mind has to be turned inward. Also, the mind has to be equipped to understand the reality within, the peace within. So that is where the Jnana Chakshus, when we say Jnana Chakshus, it is not something like a different eye or something. The trained mind turning inward and having the attention or having the unison with the reality. When the mind is pure, mind is without the karma vasanas, the mind is clear and pure and turn inward, mind will be with that reality. There is no reflection, and even the reflection is pure. There is no deterioration in the reflection. Clear? Verse number 66. Sravanadibhiruddipta Jnanagni paritapitaha Jiva sarvamalan mukta Swarnavadodate swayam Swarnavadyode Sravanadibhiruddipta Jnanagni paritapita Jiva sarvamalan mukta Swarnavadyodate swayam. Swarnavadyodate swayam. So here Sravanadibhi Uddipta. So Uddiptam meaning the maturity coming through Sravanadi. Sravanadi meaning through Sravana Manana Dhyanam. Sravana Manana Nididhyanam. So the Jnana Sambat, Jnana Yogyada Prapti to Jnana Prapti. The knowledge is attained through the Jnana Yogyada Prapti. Knowledge is attained through the purification. The Jiva, free from all the impurities, being heated in the fire of knowledge. Jnanagni paridapida. So the Jiva, free from the impurities, being heated in the fire of the knowledge, kindled by hearing. Hearing whom? Hearing the qualified masters, hearing the realized masters. Itself shines of itself like a gold. When we say hearing, Sravana, Manana, Dhyana. There are three courses here. Let us understand that. The first is basically the listening the truth from the scriptures as explained by the Guru, as explained by the realized Guru, Sravanam. Next is reasoning of the truth heard, thinking about that knowledge and doing the reasoning with it. This is the Mananam. And the last step is what? The deep reflection, the deep contemplation on what has been heard and reasoned out. This is called as the Dhyanam or Nididhyasana. So one has to do what? One has to get equipped to make the mind pure. The mind has to be pure. And the purity comes through the different processes, such as what? The Sravanam from a realized Guru, then doing the reasoning within, called as the Mananam. And what happens after that? The deep reflection, the contemplation on what is heard and reasoned. So this stage is called as the application of the knowledge that is gained out of the Sravana Mananam. So once this application of the knowledge happens, the egocentric personality, so called as the Jivatma, has to get rid of its own limitations, and the Jiva will rediscover its real nature. The Jiva will understand the true nature. The Jiva realizes that the real nature as the eternal self, the embodiment of the peace, which is always shining, ever effulging, Sada Nirasta Kuhagam, in terms of Srimad Bhagavatam. Sada Nirasta Kuhagam Satyam Param Dhimahi. So that self is the embodiment of peace, that self is the embodiment of compassion, that self is the embodiment of prosperity. So the egocentric Jiva will drop the limited identities and discovers the true nature, which is the embodiment of peace, embodiment of compassion, embodiment of prosperity, embodiment of happiness. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti.